UT Hall of Fame Diving Invitational. Dale finished this the diving order, so this from worst to first how they finished this morning, but none of those results carry over.
No.
Emilie Bretscher was the first to dive. She just went. This will be the second diver. Frida Kaellgren, as Bretscher hops out of the pool. Had a good day yesterday. Third place finish. Was really even throughout. Very impressive, her consistency.
She was. I was very impressed.
Score of 52.50. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and she starts off actually improving from her preliminary round on her first dive already by about 10 points.
Frida Kaellgren, the sophomore from Arizona State. Swedish, grew up in Malmo, Sweden. DD of 2.4 on this 403B. We'll see this 4 times, this dive in the opening round.
It is a very common dive to start on, and that was a beautiful dive. One of the things I think that I love about her diving is her position in the air. It's very graceful, very polished diving. You're going to see a lot of these athletes competing this dive in the first round. It's something that they probably feel very comfortable with. They've done for a long time, and they want to start off their list of dives on frankly a good round.
2 6.5s, a 7.5 to go along with 2 7s. For Kaellgren, a 51.60. Up next will be teammate Ashley McCool. You fell in love with her last name yesterday, the sophomore from Alberta, Canada. Finished 5th in yesterday's 3-meter. A couple of second-place finishes in fall dual meets against UCLA and USC for the sophomore.
And you know what? I did fall in love with her name, but also I've really fallen in love with her composure while she's diving. Her last name's very appropriate for how she dives. She just seems really calm and collected the whole time. This right here is a great way to start off. She actually competed that in the second round, so she must have felt confident with how she did in prelims in order to move it to her first round dive come finals.
She's majoring in art, so really fits the whole persona that we've seen from McCool. First dive scores a 47.50. Lizzie Cui from Louisiana State University.
Also competing in inward 1.5 pike like we've seen, and executes it beautifully. This is one of those dives that you really need to worry about how close you are to the diving board, because it's such a simple dive that these judges are going to find every little thing to nitpick.
First time seeing Lizzie as she goes, the senior from Auckland, New Zealand. Second teamer all SEC last year, 7-time NCAA qualifier. So it'll bring up Meagan O'Brien. She did have the 403B originally listed, but she changes it and is going with the harder inward 2.5 somersault tuck.
And it's going to pay off. That is an excellent dive and really bold to start her list of dives with such a tough one. She is so strong. Nobody in this competition can compete with her strength and power. An inward 2.5 tuck with a degree of difficulty of a 3.1, and she makes it around like it's a walk in the park.
Hardest DD we have seen yet, 5.5s, 3 of them in a 6.5, but still good enough with that DD to be the best score we've seen thus far. 52.70 for the senior from the University of Texas. It's now Brooke Schultz, the sophomore from Fayetteville, Arkansas.
Now this is the first front 2.5 pike that we've seen in the competition. We'll see it from several other divers. Brooke is going to be a little disappointed in this one. She gets a great takeoff from the diving board, but unfortunately lets it fly a little bit past vertical, which is why you see that splash. We saw that a lot on 3-meter from not just Brooke, but from several divers, and I think it's very indicative of where they are at this time in the season.
Speak with Coach, also Dad. Talk about that dive that scored a 42.90. Now Murphy Bromberg, redshirt senior from Bexley, Ohio, coming off a second place finish on the 3-meter yesterday.
And here we see another inward 1.5 pike, and I think so far the best one of the round. She gets a lot more height off of the diving board than some of the other competitors. Beautiful position in the air. Look at that toe point all the way through the water and barely a splash.
3-time All-American, 2-time honorable mention All-American for the 4-time Big 12 champ. Solid score, 4 7.5s and 8.5 as well, and even 54. Puts her atop the leaderboard with one diver left in the opening round. Junior Allison Gibson from right here in Austin, Texas. 2017 NCAA champ on this 1-meter event. 6th yesterday in the 3-meter. She'll start things off with that 403B.
And again, another beautiful inward 1.5 from these Texas divers. She's very comfortable on this dive, so she can really be aggressive off of the diving board. Excellent position in the air. Not quite as good of a rip, though, as her teammate Murphy Bromberg, so the judges will take a little bit off for that.
7 straight across the board, reflected in the scores for Gibson.
Not only had the best entry in the water, but probably the best height and position in the air as well.
So as a competitor, what is your approach?
All 6 dives perfectly vertical on your head. There's just no room for error in an event like this where everyone's competing the same dives.
Bretscher again, a 105B.
She is so solid and consistent. A front 2.5 pike, something we just saw Brooke Schultz stumble with a little bit in the first round. Emilie gets some excellent height off of the diving board, and she's got a beautiful entry into the water. You don't see much of a splash coming off of her no matter how she hits the water.
54.60 for the sophomore, qualified for the NCAAs on both the 1-meter and the platform last year. She was 39th after preliminaries on the 1-meter. Kaellgren, back 1.5 somersault pike.
That's a great dive. What is really impressive on this dive is that she might have been slightly past vertical, but she was able to hide it when she hits the water. So as she's hitting the water here, she bends her knees under, and what that also does is pull the water under with her so she has a cleaner entry.
2 6.5s, 2 7s, and a 7.5, 47.15 for Frida on that, her easiest dive of the 6. It's now McCool.
Oh, and an excellent second round dive from McCool as well. She looked a little bit hesitant when she came out of the pike position and reached for the water, but she has a great hurdle there. You see her very strong and balanced on the end of the diving board. Reaches for the water, kind of still has her body in a little bit of a hollow position when she hits, but an excellent entry.
Solid 3 7s, a 7.5, and an 8 for McCool, who competed at the NCAAs in this event, finished 26th. 7th place finish at the Zone E Championships after a 4th place finish in the Pac-12. Lizzie Cui will be up. 3-time NCAA All-American honorable mention, once on the 1-meter board.
Now competing the same dive that we just saw a few times and executes it really well. She isn't quite in as tight of a pike as some people can get into in the air. You see a little bit of a gap there between her chest and her legs. However, she makes that dive around easily and has a beautiful entry, barely a splash when she hits the water.
58.50. That will put her atop the leaderboard with the 108.90. She was 14th in yesterday's prelims of the 3-meter, so we didn't get to see her in the final, but she has won this event in every meet she's competed in thus far this fall. It's Meagan O'Brien. Step up with a 203B to come for her second dive.
And this is her easiest dive of the competition. What's so amazing, she gets so much height off of the board, she comes out of that pike position in order to land vertical so early. She barely touches her legs, and before you know it, she's letting go and having to just float it over into the water.
With the 1 meter and the 3 meter for the two-time Big 12 champ. 17th last year at NCAA's, a 48.30 for her second dive. Finished second in the Big 12 championships. She did win this event at the 2017 UT Diving Invitational, but one of the big differences this year, a stacked field. The NCAA's will be here this spring. So divers like Brooke Schultz and teams like Arkansas coming to take advantage of that as Schultz is in for a second dive.
That was a great comeback dive. Brooke struggled in her first round, probably a little frustrated with it because she knew it was a dive that she could nail. And if I'm her coach, I am really excited to see that she's able to just put that behind her and come out and nail her second dive like this.
Solid scores for the sophomore Schultz. 3 7.5s and 8 and an 8.5 as well. Now Murphy Bromberg up in the 105B. We've seen this twice already in this round.
Oh, that was a good save from Murphy. She was a little unbalanced there at the end of the diving board. You can see in the middle of the hurdle, she kind of checks her arms a little bit, has to catch herself right there, toes over the edge, but she stays calm, doesn't let her affect her, slightly over-rotated, but for what it could have been after that hurdle, a great save.
6.5 straight across the board, 50.70. That'll put her in third place. Through two with one left in round number 2. Gibson up on the same dive. She won this event at the USA Diving National Championships earlier this year.
And that was an excellent dive. Looked great in the air. She needed to get her hand a little better and have a better entry in order to see some really big scores. But she gets everything out of that diving board, is able to come out of the pike and reach for the water. Unfortunately, just a little too much of a splash.
2 6.5s, 3 7s for a 53.30. Have a good competition developing atop the leaderboard. Very tight here in the women's 1 meter final. Rounds 3 and 4 when we come back here to Austin, Texas. Rocca, 4-time All-American, during her time diving here at the University of Texas. Saw a great competition yesterday, absolutely stacked field. Mentioned earlier that the NCAA's will be contested later on in 2019 in the spring here in Austin, so why so many teams have made the journey here right before Thanksgiving. But an interesting time of the year. Still a lot of divers working on things and ironing out some of those kinks.
Absolutely, and I think this is the meet where you want to be trying different things. You want to throw some of these bigger dives. We've already seen Meagan O'Brien add a harder dive. She's going to do it again later on in her list. We see Emilie there doing a front 1.5 with 2 twists. A little bit over-rotated, which is why she has that big splash. She still seems to be happy. She's always smiling, which I really love.
Always a great demeanor we've seen from her throughout the 2 days thus far. 39, that's her lowest scoring dive, though. Put her at 146.10 halfway through the competition. All divers, 6 dives. Cumulative highest score wins the competition. Kaellgren, the sophomore, up on a 303B, a reverse 1 1/2 somersault pike. Finished third place Pac-12 championships in this event last year.
And she really excelled in this dive in the preliminary round. A little bit off here, though, in finals, and it all starts with her hurdle. Right there, you see her twist her body. She loses her balance a little bit. Still gets some phenomenal height off of the diving board, but sort of starting your dive off like that, a little bit off tilt, can really impact the outcome.
49.20. 2 6.5s, 2 7s, and a 7.5 for the Swede. Ashley McCool. Finished right behind teammate Kaellgren at the Pac-12 Championships last year in 4th. Both of these sophomores. 105B. For this, her 3rd dive.
Actually a 203B. She's changed her order around from the preliminaries, which is interesting. It's something we've seen from a lot of these divers. I think halfway through the season, trying to find your rhythm and find what order really makes the most sense for you. This was her best dive in prelims, and it is, again, her best dive so far in the finals. 2 8s, 2 7.5s. Barely a splash when she hits the water. Just very well executed back 1.5.
156.30, her score thus far. That puts her atop the leaderboard. This is who she is chasing, Lizzie Cui, the senior. DD of 2.3, though this her easiest dive of the 6.
And it's the same dive we just saw from McCool, so the judges have a very specific frame of reference now to compare it to.
It's all good scores from McCool. What does Q have?
Very similar. We're going to see very similar scores. Great pike position. A lot of control on this dive. You want to make sure you're still aggressive, but have control over this movement. You see her bend her knees as she's hitting the water, just pulling that water under in order to minimize that splash.
52.90. Couple of 7.5s, couple of 8s. For the senior from New Zealand. Another senior, Meagan O'Brien. Compete the forward 2.5 somersault pike.
Oh, that was a good looking dive. It looked like she was a little concerned of her feet maybe hitting the diving board as she was coming through. Didn't get the best hurdle. It was a little unsteady. But right there, you see, had she come out or been a little bit different in her height, she might have been a pinch too close to the diving board. Made her a little nervous, held on to that pike too long, and let it fall over. Although her skills with her Sammy there, just cutting it back up to her shoulder, I think gives her a couple extra points in my mind.
Has O'Brien currently in 5th. Brooke Schultz. DD of 2.4 on this 303B.
Oh, and it's beautiful. A hint of a splash. You could tell she kind of broke a little bit in her shoulders when she hit the water. Didn't impact her too much. She's not going to really see much of that hit her score because the entry is so beautiful and she's perfectly vertical.
Schultz was in 8th after the 2 dives. Her 3rd, a 55.20. Will put her at 151, so does jump up the leaderboard. 2 dives left to take us halfway through the competition. A back 1.5 somersault pike for the redshirt senior Bromberg.
Oh, that is phenomenal. That's probably the best back 1.5 we've seen. Again, the difficulty is a little bit lower on this dive. So if you want some big scores, you really have to nail it. Perfect position in the air, beautiful pike, and the best entry we've seen so far, at least on that dive.
4 7.5s and an 8. Is that where you'd have it?
Yeah, I probably would have gone 8. I really liked that dive.
51.75. 3rd dive for Bromberg. Gibson, close out round 3. Back 1.5 somersault pike, same dive. Was in 4th place after 2 rounds. Can she move up the leaderboard?
She might be able to with that. She didn't get quite the same height that her teammate Murphy Bromberg got off of the board. However, her entry is just as impressive. You see here, her legs are perfectly vertical. Great distance from the board. This is an excellent view to see that distance, which is something the judges are also looking at.
He's still chasing the Bayou Bengal, Lizzie Cui.
It's a tight race. You see there we've got 5 athletes within 10 points of each other, and when you have 3 rounds left to go, I mean, anyone could really take this. You've got Did you see that Olympic rings tattoo there? If that gives you any idea of the kind of experience that we have in the pool today.
Bretscher will kick off round 4 with a back 1.5 somersault pike.
Oh, that's a great bounce back dive. Her last round, not the scores she was looking for, but forgets about it, gets back up here for round number 4. Hair over rotated, but a great dive. 7s from every single judge. You don't always see a unanimous score like that. 7s all the way around.
Kaellgren with a reverse 1.5 somersault and 1.5 twist free.
This is one of the first twister dives that we've seen so far in the event. This is where some people either can really step aside and put themselves above the competition or really struggle.
She closes out with 3 dives with DDs of 2.6, all her hardest dives.
And that was solid. So this is where some people struggle on any kind of dive with twisting, whereas others really excel. So this is where you see a lot of separation in a field like this. That was a great dive to kind of kick off these last 3 rounds.
2 6.5s, 3 7s at 53.30 for the 4th dive. McCool now with her reverse 1.5 somersault pike.
Oh, it's beautiful. Excellent distance from the diving board and really comfortable there in her hurdle, which is really key. You want to make sure you're right there on the end of the diving board, balanced. You don't want your chest leaning a little forward, or you don't want to be leaning back. And once she gets that great hurdle, she's just on autopilot from there.
Good scores for the ever steady McCool. 7.5s, a 7 and an 8, even 54 puts her at 210.30. All divers though chasing the Olympian. She competed in Rio, was the first time a diver from New Zealand had represented the country in the sport since the '92 Olympic Games in Barcelona. 5-time national champ. Second diver in LSU history to compete at an Olympic Games.
And this was a good example of being a little bit less balanced on the end of the diving board with the same dive. So right here, she's off to the side, a couple inches back from the end of the board. So she's trying to control it and can't really go on autopilot. She's having to make adjustments in the air and unfortunately over-rotates in the process.
Scores 4 6.5s, a 7 for 46.80, and that will put her now behind Ashley McCool by just under 2 points. Through 4 dives, Meagan O'Brien, same dive we just saw from Q for her 4th.
O'Brien's hurdle. This to me is the most phenomenal part of her diving. It's her strength. She actually is strong enough to dip the diving board into the water. But on top of that, she's still just as aggressive, gets after this reverse 1.5, comes out, has all day to reach for the water. 7, 7.5, 7, 7.5, 7. And she's excited to kind of kick off the back half of her list with that dive.
51.60. You talk about strength. We showed some of those pictures yesterday. She has broken a diving board. Badge of honor, though.
I love it. It is. It's just so impressive. It requires so much, not just strength, but patience and just rhythm on the end of that board. It's really something special.
O'Brien currently sitting in 4th. Brooke Schultz.
Oh, and this is the dive I spoke about in the open. Her reverse 2.5. We're going to see it from a couple of athletes. I don't know if we're going to see it competed that well, though. This is such a difficult dive. Makes it all the way around. Kicks just last minute to sneak it in. barely a splash, and that could be what sets her apart from all the other divers tonight.
DD of 3.0, her hardest dive. 4 sevens and 1 6.5. Is that how you saw it?
Absolutely. And you know what? She wasn't even at the end of the diving board. She had to make a few adjustments after that hurdle. Didn't phase her. She still killed it.
That will take Schultz up into first place, so she vaults over McCool and Q. Now 3.7 points clear. Is Bromberg in with her 303B?
She got a little too conservative and cautious on this. A little bit slow in the rotation. I've seen her really get after this dive a little bit better, but then she comes out of the pike a hair too early. And that's her first miss of the evening.
She was in second place through round 3, but the 42 will drop her down to 5th with teammate Gibson left to dive. So a disappointing dive from Bromberg. Gibson will close out round 4. Reverse 2.5 somersault tuck.
The same dive we just saw from Schultz. And you know what? She didn't compete this in the preliminary round. She's stepping up her game in finals.
Can she catch the leader?
Oh, she might. That was a great dive for Allison. I love this. I love seeing, especially in the middle of the season, why not? Throw your most difficult dives. Get some experience under your belt with this. That's a tough dive. A lot of pressure on her, and she really, really impressed me with this.
Scores pretty similar to what was registered from Schultz. More sevens from Schultz, a 58.50 with that DD. Puts Gibson at 212.80. The coaching staff happy. But a strong dive from Allison. Gibson has a very tight leaderboard atop. Brooke Schultz leading, but Gibson hot on her heels after this solid dive to close out round number 4. 2 rounds left in the women's 1 meter. Here on day number 2, event number 1, the women's 1 meter finals turned into quite a competition, so we will close things out. After us this evening, Coach Karen Aston takes their perfect 2-0 record back home after facing off against North Texas, getting a win against McNeese State this evening, live at 7 o'clock for the 11th ranked Texas Longhorns here on LHN. So our standings through 4 rounds: Brooke Schultz, Allison, Gibson. They do the same dive, the most difficult dive we have seen, and they both jump up to the top of the leaderboard.
They did, and you know what? It's still a tight race, which is what's exciting. Very similar to 3 meter, where we've got 2 rounds left that are going to decide everything, but it was that 4th round that's going to make the difference in the end.
1.2 points separate first and second place. Emilie Bretscher compete her 5th dive at 303B. DD of 2.4.
She struggled a bit on this dive in the prelims, only scoring, 5.5s, 1 4.5. This is an improvement, which is something that her coach Adam Soldati will want to see. Just an improvement from the morning round into the evening. Still some room for improvement as far as making sure she sees her spots and comes out of that dive on time.
2 6s, 3 6.5s, a 45.60 for the Purdue Boilermaker. Frida Kaellgren. This is her 2nd consecutive dive, the DD of 2.6.
A front 2.5 pike, and you know what? It's a very solid dive. She doesn't have the same amount of time that some of the other divers have had to come out of that pike and float it around, maybe put a little bit more polish and flair on the end of it. A little bit splashy instead when she hits the water, but certainly not a miss. It was a solid dive.
Was in 5th place heading into this 5th round, a 49.40. 250.65 cumulative.
Go, Ashley!
His teammate Ashley McCool up on the same dive we saw from Bretscher to start round 5.
McCool is another example of really stepping up her degree of difficulty in the finals, like we've seen from some other athletes. She's smiling, she's laughing there. This was just a really good opportunity for her to experience this dive in a finals competition. It's a very difficult dive, but something that you need practice, and in the middle of the season at an invitational like this where you have nothing to lose, that's when you compete it.
Where does that dive succeed or fail?
To me, the key to that dive is all in the hurdle. You need to be perfectly balanced on the end of the diving board in order to get the height that is required, and to also be comfortable in order to go after the amount of strength and power you need to have that dive completed successfully.
2 solid dives to close out the competition for Q. She can get right back in the mix. 2.6 on this 53.33D. Q had fallen from first down to fourth, but more by virtue of the great dives we saw from Schultz and Gibson.
Oh, that's a great dive. That will definitely keep her in the mix with some of these other divers. Great hurdle you see there, so she's comfortable as she gets into the air, gets into that twisting position, a nice tight twist, and lands perfectly vertical.
Solid scores, 4 7s, a 7.5, puts her at 263.20. That will put her atop the leaderboard, albeit for now, as those who are ahead of her still to dive. Meagan O'Brien had fallen to 7th after 4 dives. See what she has here with the 53.33D, same dive.
Oh, very well done. She has a gymnastics background, which I think you see in her twisting. She's very comfortable twisting. Gets into a nice tight position right here, able to give herself plenty of time to square her body and reach for the water.
Great look from above.
That's a great angle to be able to see just how complex a dive like that is when you're flipping and twisting at the same time.
1 6.5, but 2 7.5s. Take the 2 7s, 55.90. So O'Brien trailing Q. But Schultz, the leader coming into this round, had a stellar dive. The last round, this a 2.6 DD. Same one we have seen last 2.
Oh, that was a beautiful dive. I wasn't sure how she'd handle this. Hurdle is a little bit far back, which is tough on a reverse like that. You see her toes are a couple inches from the end of the board. She really has to pull herself into that tight pike position as she's heading for the water, but she's able to do so and able to pull her body around to vertical.
Solid scores from the judges, 2 7s, 3 7.5s, a 57.20. That will keep her in the lead position with that 271.20 cumulative score. Murphy Bromberg, this her easiest dive, DD of 2.2.
And it's a beautiful dive, a little bit too much of a splash, kind of rolls it into the water. But when you're doing an easier twisting dive compared to the other athletes, it really has to be perfect if you're going to be able to keep up with the leaderboard. And that might drop her a little bit further down.
Bromberg, the 2017-18 Big 12 Diver of the Year, scores a 44. Her specialty really platform. Looking forward to seeing her tomorrow. Haven't televised the platform event in a couple years, so something we're really excited to see tomorrow morning.
Very excited.
Allison Gibson closing out round number 5.
This is always such a beautiful dive for her. To give you guys a good idea of what she just did, she actually competed Murphy Bromberg's dive plus an added twist. So that's where now dives become a lot more difficult, and you're rewarded both from the judges and with the degree of difficulty. She has a beautiful twisting position in the air. This is always a very solid and consistent dive for her that I think she can rely on if it's a tight race.
268.70, so a little bit more space has opened up between her and Schultz. Schultz in first for the two-time USA Diving National Champ, Allison Gibson. As we take a look at the standings, so still tight atop, but it's Schultz and Gibson. Q back in third.
And what might make the difference, we talked about difficulty earlier in the competition. Allison Gibson has a more difficult final dive than Brooke Schultz, which means she has the ability to close that gap a little. She has 3 points or so that she needs to make up, and she can do it.
O'Brien, Kaellgren, fourth and fifth. As Bretscher will close out her competition with a inward 1.5 somersault pike. And getting plenty of love from her teammates. Love to hear that.
She is. Purdue always has such a just solid and consistent diving team. There's always an incredible amount of talent, great coaching from Adam Soldati. She stumbled here or there throughout this finals event. But in general, I think she's got to come away pretty happy with so far how she's competed on the springboard, both 3-meter and 1-meter at this point in the season.
Finished third yesterday. Couple slip-ups in today's competition, but still smiles all around for the sophomore from Knoxville, Tennessee. So her day done. Kaellgren's last dive, another 2.6 DD on the forward, 1.5 somersault, 2 twist free.
This is exactly what we just saw from Allison Gibson. Oh, you know what? It's terrific. She actually had better distance from the diving board than we saw from Allison Gibson. Look at that. Just really beautiful positions in the air. Her legs are tight together, toes pointed. Just a very graceful diver.
It was a 55.90 scored by Gibson, so just under that with a 54.60.
She seems happy.
For the sophomore from Malmo, Sweden. 305.25 will be her final score. Ashley McCool close out her day with an inward 1.5 somersault pike.
And she's finishing with this dive because she's extremely confident in it. She wants to end with a dive that she knows she can nail if it were important and if it were a close race. And she does. A little bit of a splash there when she hits the water. Kind of holds her legs just a little shy of vertical, which is where that splash comes from. You can see here as she hits. But a solid dive.
1.6, 3 sevens, a 7.5, 50.40 for the sophomore from Alberta, Canada. As Elizabeth Q back 1.5 somersault, 1.5 twist free.
And this was one of her best dives in prelims, actually her second best dive, scoring about 50 points, which is what she needs, if not better, right now. Oh, and she should do it. That was a great dive. We've seen this dive actually in more the reverse direction, now standing backwards on the end of the diving board. The key to this is just on that takeoff. You need to be taking off at the right angle in order to get enough momentum to complete the dive, but not push yourself too far back into the middle of the pool where you'll be deducted.
The marks for Q, 2 sevens, 3 7.5s, 318.20 now stands atop the leaderboard. That is what the competition will have to beat. Meagan O'Brien changed her final dive, closed things out with a much harder reverse 1.5 somersault, 2.5 twist free.
She looks nervous. Taking some deep breaths there. Oh, good for her. Nothing to be that nervous about. She doesn't often compete this dive. This is what the middle of the season, this is what an invitational is for. kind of get that experience. That's a really tough dive. That's something I competed on 3 meter. She literally has 2 less meters to do this dive in. A little bit sloppy there. She still has some work to do in order to get some big scores on this dive, but there's no way to improve if you're not giving yourself the opportunity to compete it.
1 4.5, 2 5s, and a 5.5 puts O'Brien at 297.70, currently in 3rd place. So these 3 dives will determine the winner. Brooke Schultz has the easiest of the 3 on the inward 1.5 somersault pike. DD of 2.4, current leader after 5 rounds.
And that's a great way to end. That's probably the best inward 1.5 pike we've seen. Perfect distance from the diving board. There's really not much wrong with that dive. She's going to get some excellent scores from all of these judges.
Saw a lot of the divers kick off the competition in round 1 with that dive. Solid scores, 2 7.5s, 2 8.5s, and a 8 even. 328.80 puts Schultz back up into 1st place. So can Bromberg or Gibson catch the sophomore from Arkansas?
Now, I don't think Bromberg can catch her from a point standpoint. However, this is a very crucial dive for Murphy Bromberg. It's by far her most difficult dive, and something that if she can continue to excel at, oh, she could really be a force to be reckoned with. This is my favorite dive of the entire competition. She stumbled earlier. This is a great way for her to bounce back. The only other diver we saw compete this is Meagan O'Brien, and this was much better. Great tuck position in the air. Makes a very difficult dive look easy, landing perfectly vertical.
So solid way to close things out for the senior Bromberg. 302.90 puts her in 4th. So it all comes down to this. The Big 12 champion as a freshman, first time she ever competed at the NCAA. She won this event. Can she win here at home?
Oh, she needs just over 60 points, and it's going to be close. That was a beautiful dive in the air. Excellent twisting position. And what it's going to come down to is the degree of difficulty.
You said she needed just over 60 points. We're waiting to see the scores come in. Did Allison Gibson do it? 2 7.5s, 3 8s, and Gibson is your champion.
She did. I love it when it comes down to the last dive like this. It is so exciting, but that kind of pressure-packed situation for Allison Gibson to be in is such great experience at this point in the season. That right there is what she's going to see at NCAA championships, and for her to be able to overcome that, overcome a rough 3 meter event yesterday, if I'm her coach, I am so excited with where she is.
A great way to kick off day number 2 as Allison Gibson takes it for the host Texas Longhorns, Brooke Schultz and Lizzie Cui. As we have seen the women now in both the 3 meter and the 1 meter have one more event coming your way this evening, though. The men will take it up